we can
Awesome.
officially get started. So let these last two people in. All right. So welcome everyone to a minimalist guide to building a unicorn brought to you by Earlywork and of course our special guest Sahil Lavingia. My name is Reina and
And I'm
Aloha.
Aloha, one of the community members at Earlywork.
And we'll be your hosts for today. So we'll kick off with a chat with Sahil. We'll walk through his book, time at Pinterest, Gumroad, all the fun things. And of course, we've got to decode some of Sahil's tweets at the very end. And at the end, we'll have some time to open up for audience questions. So I'm going to drop a Slido link into the Zoom chat right now. So at any time, if you want to ask Sahil a question at the end, or if you just want to see what other people are asking, this is your chance to ask that. So going in the chat now, so everyone in meeting. You can also upvote questions as well. So at the end, we'll probably just pick from the top which one gets the most upvotes. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guest. And because there are so many accolades in here, I'm going to refer to my notes. So Sahil is the founder and CEO of Gumroad, a service that helps creators get paid for their work. His startup has attracted the likes of the one and only Naval. I'm a big fan of Naval and many others. And he is also an investor of his own fund, and his LPs include Tim Ferriss, Elad Gil, and he's got more than 255,000 followers on Twitter now, which is a great achievement. And now, just got to add to the list, he's the author of The Minimalist Entrepreneur. So welcome to the Hill. Virtual applause. It's not quite the same online, but we'll do our best.
I'll take it. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And this is one of Sahil's first Aussie appearances, this from what I hear. So very, very excited to have you here. So I'd love to kick off with your book, which is the whole reason why we're gathering here today. So let's start with something a bit more general. So tell us a bit more about why you decided to write a book in the first place.
Yeah, so I wrote in 2019, I published this essay reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company, which is my pinned tweet if anyone wants to check it out. But basically is about the history of Gumroad, the ups and downs, kind of encapsulated the 8 years or so of that experience. And it resonated pretty deeply with a lot of people. And ever since, I'd kind of built my audience and just have gotten thousands, if not tens of thousands of questions, DMs, emails about various things about building a business. And I wanted to just write a single thing that I could basically point to and say, hey, go read this. This has everything that I think about, know about business, and go read it. And if you have questions after you've read it, happy to help answer any of those for you. And that's kind of why I wrote it, is just basically to scale myself in the conversations I was already having with people, faster.
Yeah, there was a great quote I heard. I think it was someone from the community actually. It's if someone's asked me the same question, if 3 different people have asked me the same question, I'm going to write a blog or something else about it. So love that idea of scaling yourself. So one of the topics that I'd love to dive into a bit deeper is first community, then product. And that's something that we tried to really incorporate here at Earlywork. It's, you build your following first, the people who sort of believe in your mission, and then you can talk about productizing. So I'd love to dig into the importance of this. We talk a lot about product market fit, but you're suggesting there's a need to build a community first.
Yeah, and you don't have to necessarily build your own. You can join one and participate in one. But yeah, I think looking back at my own life and the success stories and trying to find sort of common themes, I think one of them is that generally the most successful people have this kind of bottoms up approach to building, where they just find a group of people that they hang out with, spend time with, care about. It might be, the people you go to church with, it might be your family, it might be, for me, painters or science fiction writers or other founders or entrepreneurs or any of these sorts of people. And if you start with a group of people, then I think it's a lot easier to get product market fit because you can just solve their problem. You already have the customers lined up waiting for you. They already trust you because you've already built kind of a relationship with them. And I think, yeah, a lot of people just get stuck with like, they build something and no one wants to use it. And that I think should never happen, right? Like you should never build something with that people like, without people waiting, to buy your product and who already trust you and all these sorts of things. So I just think it's just generally really, really important.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, one last thing. If you're got a bit of a noisy background, please mute yourselves. Otherwise, let's keep going. So I think another one of the really interesting topics in your book is this idea by market by being you. And I think as a lot of young people are trying to find, what we stand for, what our identities are, and just also just being authentic about it as well. So, this audience is a lot of uni students, a lot of people early in their careers. What advice would you give to them about building confidence to build in public?
Yeah, I mean, I think confidence, is something that you get after the fact, not before. Like you don't have confidence and then you start sharing. It's like you start sharing and then over time you realize no one really cares about what you have to say, for better or worse. And really like that's what gives me confidence, is knowing that no one really gives a shit about me. I think that's like a really important superpower. I think Dave Chappelle talks about this, where he kind of left comedy for 12 years. And one thing that I think makes him a really good comic is he just doesn't care anymore. Like when you go to zero and you feel like you've kind of given up everything worth having, and everything it's kind of like dying. It's like if you ever watch one of those movies and then the person almost dies, and then that's when they become a hero, is because they've already they've died in a sense. Like they already thought they were going to die, and then that's often when some of the great acts happen. And so I think it's similar with marketing, and just generally sharing in public. The thing that empowers me is I wrote that post reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company. And when I hit publish, I wrote it off. Like I wrote Gumroad off. It was basically a zero in my head. And so now when Gumroad started doing really well because of 2020, COVID and other things, then it did really, like, I don't have that much attachment to it anymore,? And so I just think it's kind of a healthy place to be generally. And I think that whole chapter, Market by Being You, is just about finding something that you can talk about just because you care about it and because it's fun. And because, like I don't have to really think about marketing Gumroad or my venture fund or my book. Like these are all topics that I care about and I share a lot about. And I think a lot of people, like, they think they have to know everything or make it before they can start sharing. But generally, I think people want to learn from people who are just slightly ahead of them. So actually, like, you don't need to get that far. Like, as long as you're, as long as you've started, actually, like, there's enough people, like, there's always going to be like 10x the amount of people who haven't started yet than have just started. So even if you've just started and you're like, I'm just going to document my journey from 0 to 1, you're going to have hundreds, thousands of people who are interested in that, and so, ultimately, like, it's also opt-in. Like, you don't have to convince anyone, you're not trying to force anyone to follow you or listen to your words, right? So ultimately, people are on Twitter. I always remind myself this, like, people are on Twitter to waste time. Like, if they had something better to do, they would be doing that better thing. And so, like, my words on Twitter are kind of like not that interesting inherently, in just the format. Like, and so it keeps me humble and means that I share kind of any thought, because it's like the bar is low,
It's very interesting because I think a lot of people are very interested in what you're tweeting as well. So no, thank you so much for sharing.
Maybe I'm just lying to myself, but that's at least how I think about
it. For sure.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is a good time to pivot to a very early stage in your career, being the second employee at Pinterest. And for context, Sahil, a lot of people in our audiences are very early stage in their career, or they're students still at university. So I would tell us about how joining a promising startup as a super early employee influenced your career in the following years.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that joining a kind of an early stage startup like Pinterest and seeing it grow from not zero, but close to zero to, I think we had 17,000 users when I joined or something like that, registered users in the database. Now, I assume there's like 170 million or something like that. Is just the fact that, like, it's not that crazy. There's like nothing special about it, to be honest, and I think a lot of people think that, like, I don't know, like working at Canva is like some crazy thing, but it's like, no, it's just like working at any other startup, except they build something that people actually want, but besides that, like, you show up to the office, or before COVID. You showed up to an office, you like put in some work, you shipped some product, you talked to some customers, you sold some stuff, you did some BD things, you answered support emails. That's it. Like you just kind of do the same thing over and over again. This is definitely something I learned writing. Like when you write or when you paint, when you draw, you're doing the same thing that a beginner and a master does the exact same thing. It's just the master is just way better at that skill because they've just done it for a long period of time. But they're doing roughly the same thing. With drawing, you're just looking at the thing in front of you and trying to point it, write it down basically. Same thing with writing. You're just trying to take a set of thoughts and put that down, and you're using the same English words that everyone has access to, right? It's just you can't formulate like the ideas in your head. You haven't built up that kind of that skill, that compound skill. And so I think, yeah, just Pinterest gave me the confidence to realize like, wow, I can build a startup like this. There's nothing special about, now, like, I don't know how thousands of employees, like $50 billion valuation or whatever it is. Like, it's just a bunch of people, on laptops, with the internet connection. Like, that's it. And I think that's pretty empowering. It's also kind of scary, but that's probably the biggest lesson, is just it gave me the confidence to feel like I could do it myself, and that led the way to doing a lot of other things. I think it's pretty important. Like, many people don't believe, like, if you don't believe you can build $1 billion company or a $10 billion company, like, frankly, you're wrong. Like, it's not that hard, it's unlikely because there's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of serendipity involved. But in terms of actual skill and difficulty, there's many, many, many things harder than building $1 billion company, running $1 billion company, raising money. These are easy compared to birthing a child, for example, right? Like, doesn't even come close. And so if you're, or learning English is like, English is like a very strange, weird language, right? But everyone speaks it. Why? Because we've all put in tens of thousands of hours because we had to. And so we've already done things that are much harder than building a company. I think it's kind of important to realize it. And I think hopefully it makes it more accessible to people, but yeah, I think it's pretty important. Also, building $1 billion companies gets easier every year because of inflation, so that helps.
Interesting
6.2% easier this year than last year,
Yeah, for sure. Really helpful to think of it from that point of view. And speaking of Gumroad, in your public post, you mentioned Gumroad going on the brink of a failure. Speaking from a point of view of mental resilience as a founder and operator going through tough times in their startup journey, tell us about what made you hold on to Gumroad as it was going on a brink of a failure.
Yeah, honestly, I think the first part of it was just fear of failure, fear of giving it up. Like, I could have probably sold the business or shut it down or done something else, raised money for a new startup or whatever. But honestly, like, I felt obligated to our user base, our creators. They were getting paid like $2.5 million a month or something at the time. And turning off that tap just felt pretty, basically wrong. Like, it felt like something I couldn't do, shouldn't do. And when I communicated, to employees, investors around, if they were joining the company, I always said, like, creator first. It's creators first, then, investors are not first on the list, and then employees, and then creators first and foremost. And so when the decision came that, like, the only way to preserve the experience for creators was to basically lay off 75% of the company and sort of deprioritize growth and focus on profitability, I was very consistent about that, right? And so I think it's just important to know, like, what is your North Star? Like, what do you actually care about? Make sure that you're always communicating that to everyone, so it's not surprising. It was not surprising to anybody when I did the layoffs, right? What's scary and bad about layoffs is the surprise aspect of it. Like, there's nothing wrong with layoffs, I think. It happens all the time, right? Ultimately, it's a business kind of decision. But what I think leaders can improve upon is just making sure that they're not surprising their team with this sorts of news. Like, the only good, surprises are like free money. Like, that's a good surprise, but everything else, not a fan, right? And so I think that was important. I think too, I picked a product and a problem for going back to community that I cared about. And so I think a lot of people build because they want to build a successful business. They don't really care about the customers. Like, they're building like a recycling company or whatever, which is totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. But what it means is if it doesn't work for, 2 years, 3 years in, it's not working, you're probably going to give up, right? Because you don't really care that much. For me, it's like, I knew that if I stopped working on Gumroad, what would I do? I would start another company, and then I would probably pick the same group of people to build another product for, right? And so in that case, like, well, I was already running a company. I did, 5 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever, of hard work to get to this point. Like, why would I start from scratch? Like, that just didn't make any sense. So I just do this generally is I just hyper intellectualize the situation. And that helps me kind of deal with like the emotional aspect of it. It's called kind of being a turtle, I think, is like what my therapist calls it. But basically, like, you just become very intellectual and you kind of create this like distance between yourself and the situation. And it's almost like an out of body experience where like, oh, it kind of sucks that I basically have to run this business by myself and I have to do all the customer support. I basically have to do everything. And and it doesn't give me any energy to do anything else. But also I have like 10 hours of free time a day, every day. And I have a business that pays my bills, so I can basically do anything I could dream of. I could write, I could paint, I could travel the world, like same company, same situation, right? So yeah, I just think perspective is generally what I think is important about those kinds of situations, like realizing that your low moment is probably somebody else's high moment, right? Which is kind of the point of reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company, was that point, which is like my failure to build $1 billion company is actually like most people would consider a success, right? That's kind of the dichotomy I was kind of addressing there that I think resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's so like admirable that you kind of showed it in the public and the failure in the public, but you came out of it alive, which is like people's worst nightmare. But in the end, it turned out pretty good. So
Yeah, and now I can do anything in the world because I'm dead. Like nothing's scarier than a dead man. Yeah, I'm excited to just mess around with like crazier and crazier ideas over time.
Wow. Do you have anything in the pipeline so far? All good if you can't actually say anything.
Yeah, we have some stuff. Unfortunately, like I do want to. I like show. One lesson from writing that I often use. As I mentioned, I have a bunch of those. Is show don't tell. So I'm a really, I try even with my writing. Like I've thought about writing about NFTs or this or that or whatever. Like I write, or at least I write a lot. I publish very infrequently. But the reason is generally like I think I can show people rather than tell people like what I believe, but it's just going to take 6 months of building actual product to show people. So yeah, and then next week on Friday, we will be launching something at Gumroad, which is going to set up the future for us. And then hopefully Q1 of next year, will be our first big announcement in terms of a functionality, but it has to do with liquidity. It has to do with a lot of what people are talking about on the internet these days. That's all I'll say for now.
All right, we'll stay
Honestly,
tuned to see what that is.
Like if I told everyone would be excited, and then I'd feel good, and then I wouldn't build. Actually, I'd be demotivated at that point. Like I keep it a secret to make sure I only get the value once I've done all the hard work. I don't want any pre celebration, to corrupt my priority stack.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess it's fair to say that Gumroad has come out the other side of all the pretty tough time for you and the business, and obviously lots of amazing new things coming up soon. I think it's very interesting in how the company itself works. So no meetings, no full-time employees, no deadlines, which sounds like the dream for a lot of us working desk jobs. So can you tell us a bit about why you decided to run Gumroad in this way?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it started out as a selfish sort of decision. I was pretty tired. At this point, I was like 5 years into the company, just me. Like imagine being 5 years into a company and being just by yourself. Like that's weird. And so, yeah, when I started hiring again, I was like, well, I live in Provo, Utah. I paint and write basically full time. And so I can't sit in meetings really, to be honest. And so I felt like, what I could do is I can hire people, but everyone just basically like I can create a queue in Notion, like a Kanban board, and then people can just pick off, bugs, features, whatever, and I'll design everything, put it there, easy to use. And then people can just pick stuff up and do it and then build a company, however many hours they worked, right? And that's kind of what I did when I started growing the company again in 2017 or so, 2018, I don't know exactly when. And honestly, like we've just been doing that since. So now we have 44 people. We are all working in this way. Like there's no meetings, my calendar is free of Gumroad meetings. And we do have a couple deadlines. So we have added like one deadline. The reason I can tell you, Friday of next week, there's something is because there is kind of this deadline, Black Friday for us that we're doing something with. But we try to have very, very few of those. and maybe one a year or something like that, something maybe 1 or 2 a year, something like that. But yeah, it was really just like kind of it was like the profitable way to scale the business. And it honestly has worked so well for us that it's become my new North Star for the company, actually, is like to basically just promote this way of working. It's almost like the meta narrative of Gumroad is more compelling than the actual narrative of Gumroad at this point, so leaning into that. And definitely like thinking about how can we productize this so that other companies can work in this way and try to make it more of a thing, because there's just not that many companies today that work like this.
Yeah, there are hardly any companies, maybe except some super early stage startups where single founders have a lot of, I guess, autonomy. How do you see this, or do you see this as a new normal way of working for a lot of other companies, or do you think there's still a big gap that we sort of need to leap across before we can get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will happen. I don't think it's going to be the default for anytime soon. Like, we've been working in sort of these centralized offices for, since like the late 1800s or something like that, so like we got, 2 years of remote work or something like that versus, so I think it'll take a while for like the sort of software infrastructure, the tools, the culture, the best practices, the regulatory, the tax, like a lot of different parts of the economy and government and the whole world have to adapt, right? And to this way of working for it to be really, really popular. Health insurance, like there's a bunch of kind of unanswered questions, especially around international. We have people in 17 different countries, right, that work at Gumroad. So it's weird. It's like pretty unique. I don't know very many companies that do this. We kind of get away with it because we're small, but if we were like big, then governments would come after us and say, oh, you have employees here, like all this stupid stuff, right? So I don't know. The way that I think about it is I will continue to run Gumroad the way that I'm running Gumroad, and I have an obligation to basically see this experiment through for at least a couple years. So like maybe 2 years from now, I say, hey, actually is actually stupid, and we should all be in an office in a single location, and that's the right way to build software, right? Like that's a very reasonable thing to happen, because we know it works. Like we know that we can do that. We don't necessarily know in this other world, but part of like this thing we're launching on Friday, and it'll be hopefully pretty impressive to people, and we did that the way that we work. So basically, like the reason to make Gumroad successful is not to make Gumroad successful. It's to show people that you can work this way and build amazing products and ship great features and grow a company, without having some of the infrastructure that you think you may need. You just don't need it. And we live in a world, like with Figma and Notion and GitHub and Slack and like all of these amazing tools. Like I do think it's pretty possible. For example, like I wrote the book without meetings, and I had a deadline, I guess, but like I wrote I run my venture fund like asynchronously. Like I don't have, like, so you can ultimately, like the smallest company is a company of one, and every company of one is effectively no meetings, right? No deadlines. All deadlines are enforced by you on you. No full-time employees because you're the only one, right? So Gumroad is just like a company of one. It's just I'm just trying to scale it to show people like, wow, you can actually take this pretty darn far. Actually, not too dissimilar from Basecamp, right? Basecamp, I think, took a very extreme view on working, and they have said it like they didn't need to, but they really just wanted to show people that it's possible, that the power of software means you can make a ton of revenue with a tiny team if you choose to stay small. And very few people are willing to do that. Most people, when they have the opportunity to grow and hire a bunch of people and raise a bunch of money, that's generally the path that people seem to take.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Alaha, shall we get into decoding some tweets?
Yeah, getting to the fun part of this whole Q&A, we brought out 2 of Sahil tweets that we want him to kind of decrypt and just tell us the meaning behind. I feel like your tweets are very thought-provoking, just like Naval's. Very short, but very like jolt of bolts. With the first tweet, you said it has to be somewhat selfish and somewhat selfless to be sustainable. Would you like to tell us, what did you have in mind?
Yeah, totally. I forget exactly what I was talking about specifically, but Yeah, I mean, I think just generally, like, I think there's generally, like, most people have an emphasis on one or the other, right? Like they're either doing something really selfless, like, they're doing some nonprofit work, or they're, volunteering, or donating, or whatever that may be. And then there's people who are like very selfish, right? Like capitalists, or whatever, like you want to label with that word. Like, and I think people often like, I really believe that like the right answer is like a hybrid, where like everything you do should have some degree of selflessness, something that you're doing for other people. I think you need that. I think you can't be, even the most stoic Zen person needs other people to be happy. Like I pretty much believe that. It's very hard to be sort of fully self-satiated in that way, I think. So you need to be selfless to some degree. You need to feel like you're improving the lives of others. I think that's pretty important, at least for me. And then also, but you also need to be doing something that helps you and, is selfish, right? Like it gets you what you want. And ideally, if you're doing both of those at the same time, like one, it gives you the energy to keep on doing it. You have your sort of, the incentives are aligned so that you can build your company or do whatever, invest or whatever it may be. But also like the world is benefiting from that. And if those things are aligned, you don't actually have to think about it, right? You don't have to say, oh, I'm going to do this thing that I don't like doing, but it makes me a bunch of money. And then I'm going to spend 10 hours a week, like donating to charity. Like ideally you can find a thing that I kind of jokingly called software as service, in a way, like software as a service without the software as service, where like your service to the world, like is software. It is shipping useful, valuable software that makes things cheaper, faster, more accessible, closer, et cetera, to people who may not have had access to those sorts of things prior, right? And ultimately, yeah, sustainability is like kind of the key word in the tweet. Like, I want to work on things, like many people don't, right? Many people are like, I want to sprint on this thing and I want to make a bunch of money. I want to sell the business and then I want to like go retire on a beach, which is, again, nothing wrong with that. But I don't really think about it like that. Like I think about it like, what can I do that I can do forever? I can write. Like, why did I pick up writing and drawing and painting? It's because there are skills that I can do until I die, right? There's skills that I will be developing and mastering over the next 40, 50 years. And I will be really fucking good at it. Like anything I make now is like terrible compared to what I will make when I'm in my 70s and 80s. Like that's the reason I picked those skills. Is because I literally, like, nothing I produce is interesting or worthwhile, which gives me the bandwidth and confidence to just produce without really thinking any of this stuff is that interesting or great, so yeah, that's kind of the point of the tweet, is like, find stuff. The thing that I don't say is you should, the way you should live your life is basically work on things that you can work on forever. Like don't work, it's like the Naval quote, like don't work with someone for a day if you can't work with them for life, right? That sort of thing.
It's all about the long-term game. Yeah, for sure.
I think so.
Um, yeah. And with the second tweet, you said you can be successful just by deciding that you are. And I picked this tweet because success is always seen as this final destination, but this tweet kind of suggests it's a state of being. What was the philosophy behind this?
Yeah. Well, like Sean Puri, he had that tweet about the metaverse and how the metaverse isn't a place, it's a point in time, and basically making the point that, like it's not like at some point there will be a place that we go to and it's the metaverse. It's just a state of being, state of mind, like Silicon Valley or something like that. It's like the internet is the metaverse, like everything is the metaverse. There's no difference, we're just slowly digitizing things and putting things online and making them more transparent and accessible to more people. That's it, right? We've been doing that before the internet with books, right? Like this is a natural, these are all just natural extensions of like very basic physical laws, and we're just kind of like playing them out, over time. And that's just kind of how what it takes. But yeah, I mean, when I said, I think, well, one, when I wrote reflecting on my failure to build a billion-dollar company, like part of that was deciding that I was successful, right? I said something like, I wasn't successful in that specific goal of building a billion-dollar company, but I am successful. I consider myself successful now. And yeah, I think it is ultimately a choice. It kind of goes back to that, your low point is someone else's high point sort of thing, right? Like your failure is somebody else would have been somebody else's successes. And ultimately, yeah, it's like beyond like a certain level of like, having food and shelter and like sort of basic needs met, sort of in the Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs, like beyond a certain point, anything above that, once you have enough oxygen, you're not screaming for oxygen. You're not like, I need more oxygen, right? When you are profitable business, you're not like, we need to be more profitable. No, generally you're like profitable enough means you can kind of do whatever you're doing forever, right? Like that's where you want to get to. And I think success is similar. Like once you have your basic needs met, after that point, you basically just have to say like, I'm happy with what I have, right? Because otherwise there's frankly no limit. Like you're never going to achieve it. You're never, like literally never. Like you could be worth 200, $300 billion today and be incredibly dissatisfied, that's just what it is, right? And so it's kind of a trap. It's a trap that many of us sign up for because for a variety of reasons, like money is a useful thing. You can spend it, it's nice, but ultimately, yeah, you have to decide at some point that what you have is enough. Because that's the only way to be happy ultimately.
Yeah.
And successful. Yeah, you basically just have to decide to be successful. Once you've decided to be successful, if you really truly believe you are, then there's no God that's going to decide who's successful, who's failure. There's no Santa Claus who's naughty, who's nice. These are all arbitrary. There's no one is nice, no one is bad, no one is evil. These are 100% totally arbitrary, right? Like there's no concept of failure. There's no concept of success. Those don't exist. They just don't, so you just kind of have to come to terms with that, which is kind of scary. There's like nobody there's no parent telling you what to do, right? Like there's no real right answer, right? There's no punishment for doing anything. There's no reward for doing anything. So, in that world, then of course, success and failure cannot exist, because if there's no reward, then what's the point of succeeding, right? Ultimately, just your state of mind. So that's at least what I believe. For now, maybe I'll change my mind tomorrow, but for now, that's what I believe.
We'll watch out for your tweets if you change your mind.
Yeah,
that's a really helpful.
I'll definitely tweet about it. I've been wanting to write about this one article. I'll give you a sneak peek of an idea like this. I will almost definitely not publish this because I'll never figure out the idea, at least for like several years. But I want to write an article about losing my faith is kind of the tentative title. Like I believe like an important thing for everyone to go through is, people talk about faith journeys. I think about like the opposite. Like I think the goal is that everyone should lose their faith. Even the most religious of people their goal should be to lose their faith. I think that's really important. So this I think ties into that idea on like, if you're happy with the present, if you think about the present, then faith doesn't matter. Faith is about the future.
Wow. It's a great self-realization journey as well. Damn, I think we've all been awestruck right now. I'm gonna give it to Marina now. Give all the headlight to all the audience's questions that's coming up. Marina, do you want to take over?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I've talked to so many people in this community, and some of them I know are in this call about the whole idea of like losing your faith, going on that journey, I guess. So I think that would have ticked a lot of boxes for people. So I'm looking at the slider now, and if you've got a name attached to it, I'm going to ask you to unmute and turn your camera on if you want, and ask your question yourself. Our top question though is an anonymous one, so I guess I will ask. So it says, how do you balance building a community with building a product for that community? At what point does the scale tip, and how can you tell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly, I like building stuff. So I'm constantly building things or writing or like basically like I think the goal should be you should always be producing things outside of your head. Like ultimately your ideas don't benefit anybody, right? No one benefits from the ideas in your head, whether they're amazing or not. They only benefit from your actions, the things that you create, the things that you write, build, people can sign up for, pay, use to make their lives better, right? And so I think you should always be doing that. You should always be kind of building a habit of producing things. Being prolific is the word that I like to use. And then you should also always be engaging with people in your community like that. Ideally it's not something you have to try. It's something that, you just do because, when you wake up and you check your phone, like you go on your, Reddit and you like, you just constantly, or Twitter or, Slack or Discord or wherever you sort of spend time with people. So I don't think there's like a switch. I don't think it's like, okay, you're done. I'm still like doing the same thing again, like the Pinterest versus any random other startup. It's kind of the same thing everyone is doing, right? Which is you just like share stuff, you learn stuff, you read stuff, you build stuff, you go to sleep, you wake up, you do it again, and you just keep doing it. The important thing is that you do things, right? Like, I think the thing that a lot of people get stuck on is they don't ever actually contribute to communities. They don't actually build anything. They just have ideas, and those ideas, I guess, improve over time. Maybe, I don't know what their goals are necessarily, but my guess is they don't. My guess is your ideas will only get better when you fully do a loop on the idea. You like take your idea, you build the idea, you realize your idea sucks. That's when you get better ideas. But until you go through the whole loop and realize your idea sucks, which by the way, your ideas all suck, right? Like, they're terrible. It's okay. Most ideas suck because, 50, 100 years from now, where all the ideas, everything we do is going to look shitty compared to like the way that humans will live, right? So everything we make right now is terrible. All we're doing is contributing to like future society and the achievements of our descendants, and they won't even remember any of us. So for better or worse, I think for the better. But I think just do all of those things, and as long as you're doing it, like, it's kind of like if you say, how do I get better at running? It's like, just run. Just do. You kind of know what you need to do. You just have to do more of it. And there's really only one thing that matters. I think the scariest thing about writing to me is that all you have to do is write, right? Like, everyone can do it. The unfortunate thing about writing is that you have to write. Like, there's literally no other way to get better at the skill of writing, which freaking sucks. I wish there was. I wish I could just listen to podcasts all day. I wish I could just read books and get better. I wish I could just go to a bar and hang out with my friends and talk about NFTs, and that will make me smarter. The truth is, it does not. Like, what makes you, like, it's kind of like learning soccer. Like, no one thinks that reading a book on soccer or watching someone play soccer is going to make them better at soccer. Like, maybe learning the rules, right? Like the very, very, very basics, but after a certain point, you just need to use your body, right? And exercise. And ultimately, it's the same thing with business, with community building, with sales, with marketing. You just have to get into the habit of doing that specific thing, and you can do it now. You can pick a tiny business. You can, anyone listening can pick something small enough to build and start doing it tomorrow. And you'll probably fail. It'll probably be a bad idea, but the only way you're going to know is by going through it. It's like my first web design. It's like so terrible, right? Like, everybody's first work is just terrible. And then you get feedback on it from people who are better than you. And then you get, slightly less bad. And then 2 to 3 years into it, then you're pretty good. And you can start charging money for it, enough to make a living. And then once you can make a living charging money for it, then you can get really good, because literally everyone's paying you to do the thing that you want to get good at. So you can just do that thing over and over and over again. And that's when you can, become a master within, I would say most people can master a skill in 4 years is my rough guess. 4 years of diligent effort, you can master basically any skill. And mastery meaning you can make $250,000 a year doing it. Everyone can know your name. You can build a huge audience, because 4 years is 5 to 10,000 hours, which is all you really need to get really good at anything. And I know that because, like, that's how the university system operates, right? Like, we say you can learn any skill in 4 years, and at the end of 4 years, you're going to get a job. So, and at least half of university is BS. So you can probably do it much faster than them if you didn't have to do all the stupid stuff that they make you do to graduate.
I feel like we can do a whole other session on like the death of university degrees and the changing ways of education, but I will stay on script. And I believe our next question is from Ben.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Sahil, thank you so much for your time. I had a quick question in regards to, I guess, when you're raising capital from VCs, because I did a bit of self-reflection before I actually launched my startup as to why I wanted to do it. And a big part of it was actually leaving the world better off than when I entered it. And I sort of realized that in order to have, I guess, a greater impact, you do in fact need that VC money, or at least, to have a greater impact for the specific problem that I'm trying to solve. So I guess my question was, how do you keep your values in line when pitching to VCs? Because, like, I want to build a product that customers love, that's going to, change their lives in one way or another, whilst most VCs are looking for, a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah, I mean, you should only raise VC if you want to build a multi-billion-dollar company, and ideally, your customers want you to build a multi-billion-dollar company. Like Uber, for example, I think can provide a superior service because they are a massive company. Like I think those network effects are really real for a company like Facebook or Uber or Pinterest. Sort of the Peter Thielian view on monopolies, right? You basically want to build something that then it kind of gets more useful as it gets larger, and therefore like it's kind of like blockchain, the largest chain wins, the longest chain wins, because you have the most utility value. um so yeah, I would just make sure that you're picking, if you're picking something in which a monopoly is best for your customer. Like your customer wants you to become a monopoly, right? And if that's true, then I think venture is great, and you won't have a problem raising money. If that's not true, which is it's not true for the vast majority of businesses, then you should probably not raise venture capital. You can still raise money, right? You can raise money from people, individuals, but I think raising money from a fund that will take a board seat and has LPs and is looking for kind of a power law return profile startup, then you're probably not going to be the best fit for them. The other thing is, honestly, like people ask me all the time, like what do you do about VCs who like try to ruin your business? Like the truth is no VC does that anymore. Like that was kind of a thing that happened like 10, 15 years ago. But right now, like I'll tell you, like every VC is so busy chasing the next deal that no one cares about you, honestly. Like you could disappear off the face of planet Earth and no one was going to notice, so they won't tell you what to do. They won't tell you anything. They'll be busy doing their own stuff, trying to find, build their portfolio and roughly leave you alone. They'll actually get more annoying the more successful you are, not the less. So it's kind of one of those problems that only surfaces like pretty late in the game, and that's at least. And if you're raising on a safe, like they don't get any rights or anything like that anyway. So you can kind of raise $1 million or so, test out the idea, make sure you want to go down that road before you kind of double down and commit to like raising a Series A from putting a board together and an option pool and all of those sorts of things.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Next question comes from Dan. I don't know if there are multiple Dans in this call, but you know who you are.
Yeah, it's me. Hello. Cool. Question from me. I suppose in building a startup, there's this fascinating question, and Ben talked already a little bit, but in terms of understanding, like, when is the right time, if ever, to take VC funding? So I suppose I have a two-part question. Number one, what is the strongest signal that tells you in building a startup, that it is the right time to specifically take venture funding? And then number two, what's the most important reason why someone wouldn't keep bootstrapping?
Yeah. So, I mean, the number one reason to raise venture is you need to hire engineers, and engineers are expensive. And that's it. Honestly, like that's the only reason I would ever raise venture capital. In terms of not doing, like, why to stick with bootstrapping, it's just because, you don't want to sell the business. Like you're happy with where things are. And, the great thing about owning your own business is you can take dividends whenever you want. And the minute you take venture capital and have preferred stakeholders, you no longer can. Like the only exit is a liquidity event at that point. Basically, an IPO or an M&A are the only two options, which is fine. But like, I don't know, most people don't dream about running a public company, and most people probably don't want to get acquired. So like, to me, those are always like less interesting, things. So yeah, I would say like you should bootstrap unless like that should be the default, unless you really need engineers to build your vision of the product, and you need engineers. Those people need $250,000 a year. You need to raise venture capital, right? Like unless you are just so wildly profitable that you have the cash flows, but very few businesses actually like make it work at that scale, so that's how I would think about it.
I suppose just to follow up there in terms of nuance, increasingly you're seeing, so traditionally the liquidation options have been like, yeah, either you go public or, there's an acquisition. Increasingly we're seeing stuff like, I suppose like secondary liquidation events, but then you're also seeing models emerge like, Sequoia and Lux doing patient capital, non-diluted funding like ClearBank. How do you think about, I suppose, yeah, kind of both of those as alternatives to traditional venture funding? And does that kind of, I suppose, broaden the scope for this set of situations where you would take venture funding?
No, not really, honestly. Like they don't really do anything for the landscape. Like Sequoia is just running a hedge fund with the same rough model. Like they now have 15 to 20 years to return capital instead of 10. Like I don't think it's really going to do anything different. They're looking for the same kinds of companies. And Clearbank is great, but honestly, like they're great for like very specific. I would say Clearbank and venture are like for two very different kinds of businesses. Like very few businesses need to raise money from Clearbank and venture capitalists. Like those are just two different. Venture capitalists want to invest in like high scale software, and Clearbank is really great for predictable revenue streams, cash flow businesses like Shopify brands and things like that. So they're just two very different things. I think if you're considering Clearbank, you should almost definitely not raise venture capital. Like venture capital should be the thing that very, very few people think they should do. Unfortunately, it's just so popular because it's, I don't know, it's easy money or something like that people want to take it. But I think generally most businesses should probably not be raising venture.
I see Dan is taking his opportunity to get some business advice for Earlywork while he's at it. So next question comes from Keith.
Hello. Hey, Sahil. So my question is actually related to one of the interviews you had with Shane Parrish a while back. And I think you mentioned something along the lines of saving other people time being a key skill that you really appreciate. And I think ever since I heard about that, I've been a lot more conscious of doing that, and like writing the other person's name on a calendar invite before mine, and all these like weird little things. So my question is there any other skill or mini skill like that that you currently look out for, you currently value?
I mean, a lot of it seems to boil down to that same thing, which is like you're just very observant. Like most people just don't notice that there are opportunities to save people time. Like I think it's not that people don't want to. I think it's just people just don't realize them, right? And so I think that the sort of observant is like the sort of lower level skill that I think that other skill kind of is a higher order bit on. Ultimately, like people are just, they can't observe the world. Like no one listening knows how to draw a dollar bill. Like no one knows how a dollar bill looks like. Like you can't do it. Everyone thinks they know, but you know what a symbol of a dollar bill looks like. It's like a rectangle with like some circles on the corners and then like a one in one thing and an upside down one in the other. That's not like, there's a face on there somewhere, like there's a building, there's like there's all sorts of stuff that you just don't know because you just haven't spent the time observing. So I think mostly people can just spend more time like really deeply analyzing their interactions with someone. Like look at your last 10 email chain and say, oh, could I have made that a 3 email chain or a 1 email chain? Or could I have had that phone call and turned it into like this happens all the time. Like I'm pretty vocal about it, the fact that I don't like phone calls and meetings, I thought, but people all the time, like someone today gave me a call and was like, hey, give me a call back when you can. And I'm like, I'm never going to call you back. Like ever. I won't even reply. Like I used to just reply and be like, I don't really like, can we do this, blah, 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 whatever, over like text. Now I don't even reply. It's like, you'll figure it out at some point that I don't do that kind of thing. Like my time is too worthwhile to waste on things I don't like doing. Everyone's time, it's actually not just mine, So yeah, I would just say be observant, and then, just I would say attention to detail is another one, which falls into the save people time one too. But just like when I see a deck from someone who's just like for very well researched or very specific, I think specificity is another key thing that I look for a lot. Like the more specific, the better. This is definitely something I picked up from writing. Like you don't want to say like he walked his dog. Like you want to say that it's a German Shepherd, puppy or something like that, right? Like wagging his tongue because it's hot outside. Like you want to make the image as specific as possible. Same thing with startups. Like you want to be confident about your vision, and so you need to be specific. I think generality is kind of like a sort of signal that you're not confident in your vision. So you're kind of basically like hedging your own bets, right? So you're like, oh, we could do this, but if that doesn't work, maybe we'll do this other thing instead. So we're just building this like broad marketplace solution. No, what I want to hear is that you have this incredibly specific bet. You're building only for this kind of person. You're alienating 99% of the people who would ever listen to you pitch. And those are the kinds of things that I want to invest in, people who are taking real risks, building for very specific groups of people. Because I really believe that like the largest, most successful companies are bottoms up companies. Like they're like Tesla, where like, yes, the goal is to like give everyone an electric car, but in the beginning, it's like to give 400 really rich people a really shitty electric car, right? And so lean into that. Like, what's shitty about what you're building, and who's going to, be your first users because they don't care that it's shitty. They want it badly enough, right? I think people don't spend enough time thinking about basically the beachhead, like where do you actually start with your big vision? Like, it's very easy to paint like the 10-year vision of any company, right? Like, I can spit out like $10 trillion companies. It's not hard to come up with them. What's hard is like, well, how do you actually get there? How do you mitigate the risks over time? How do you convince engineers to join your company in the beginning when you don't have a product or proof of concept? That's the hard stuff, right? Like, actually building like the 10-year vision of what it's not that hard once you've done the hard work. Like, the first 9 years are hard. The 10th year is like having fun implementing, your vision on top of all the hard work that you've already done. At least that's how I think about it. Like, Gumroad is definitely there, where now I'm just having fun. I get to build whatever I want, and we just get to experiment. And but it took like 10 years of not that to get there. So I don't really know if that answered your question, but
I think like my biggest takeaway was being specific is actually saving a lot of people all the time. I didn't actually like make that insight, but the more specific you are, the less the other person has to work to figure out.
Yeah, exactly. If I say dog, like, you have to do a lot of mental work, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to like go through your brain is inherently going through all the dogs that and picking one of them and representing it, or maybe representing multiple. But if I say like, black lab, like, you're doing a lot less work. I've saved you energy,
Yeah.
and people I think subconsciously react positively to that. The other thing I would say is, like, this is the thing that, like, I've always been a little confused about. I don't want to get too angry or anything, but like, they don't read. Like, most people don't read books. Like, the truth of it is, most people do not read books. Like, it's funny, like, I've talked to a bunch of people. Like, I did some other event a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of people who are fans of Naval, for example, probably similar here. And so I like asked the room, like, how many people have read The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch? Like, literally the book that like Naval recommends like 50 fucking times a day, and like literally like 2 people out of 100 had read the book. And it's like, wow, like, those 2 people are going to be successful. The rest of you are not, like, he literally has told you exactly what to do, and you're not doing it. Like, when I moved to Provo, Utah, like, one of the things Mormons have to do is they have to read the Book of Mormon every day. Like, that's one of the tenets of the religion. And I meet people all the time who, were active participants in the faith and did not read the Book of Mormon every day. They might have read it like every other day. They might have read it 6 times, 6 days, a week or whatever. And I was just like, that's insane. Like, this, you have to read this thing every day to go to heaven, and you're not doing that. Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm so confused, So like, Naval's literally saying, like, reading this book is worth literally millions of dollars to him, and he won't do it. Like, you won't do it. Like, that's weird to me. Like, you probably don't want that badly, which is totally fair. But then why are you listening to me? So, I've read every single book that Naval has recommended, like, and it's probably 150 books. And every time he recommends a new one, I'm like, oh fuck, like, I have to read another book. Because it's important to me. And like, I've read 350 books like in the last 3 or 4 years. I have a list of all of them, or I did. Now I don't track it as much, but I have like a Google sheet. But yeah, that's what it takes. You just have to be honest about what it takes and then do it. And there are libraries. You can torrent the books. You don't have to pay for any of them. Again, the point is not buying books. The point is reading the books. And don't read summaries like those. Never read a summary of a book. That's terrible.
Alrighty, great tips. And the last question, the one that I'm personally quite interested in, from Wilson.
Hey, Sahil. So my question was on something that you mentioned a little bit earlier on speaking about future work. And you mentioned that one of your rules is to show and don't tell. And I feel a lot of people do have the tendency for the opposite of speaking all the time on their vision and their future without actually executing. You kind of bring that dopamine rush all the way to the forefront with that. So I'm really curious, do you happen to have any other rules on speaking about the future, or is there a story behind that particular one of showing and not telling?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, conversations I've had with people that have like nailed that insight for me. Like, for example, one thing I believe pretty strongly is that a pitch should be mostly about what you have already done. which is probably pretty counterintuitive because like most startup pitches are like, these are all the things we want to do. But like, I don't give a shit. Like I can, again, like I can, I can extrapolate, for you if you just tell me what you've already done to date. Right. That's what I care about. I don't care about your business projections. I don't care about your future roadmap. Like I can figure all that out. Like if you can play the first, like, da, 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 and like, I can fill in the rest of the song. Right. So but that da, 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 like someone came up with that and you didn't, And so like, what is your da, 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 da? Like, just that's all I really need from you. By the way, very specific, right? Literally, notes. And so, yeah, I think just the specificity of it, the fact that, yeah, you're showing real effort. Like it's not easy to build a product. It's not easy to like, make it as hard as possible. Like I want to see a pitch that I'm like, wow, I couldn't do that, and I could build like a little mini MVP. So like what's harder than that? Like impress me, like write something that, like the thing that reflecting on my failure to build $1 million company, I think did well, I think was well written. But the reason it resonated so deeply with people was not because it was well written. It's because the story itself was hard. And most people would not sign up for that story voluntarily. Right. I think about this with Harry Potter, another writing metaphor. Like Harry Potter is basically a douchebag, right? Like every single thing works out for him. He like is insanely rich, basically immediately. He's famous. Everyone loves him. Like every girl like falls in love with him, whatever. Why do we like Harry Potter? Well, it's because right in the beginning of the book, his parents died. And by the way, he was at fault for that, his parents dying, right? So therefore, like no one would sign up for that. Like no one would sign up for that, even if it makes you everything else, right? It's not worth that cost. And that's why we love Harry Potter. Or by the way, you can do this with almost any famous person in fiction. Their parents are always dead. Like this is a common trope. They're all bastards, basically, at a minimum. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, whatever. Very, very popular trope. But like, so like, what is that in your pitch? Like, what's your parents dying in your pitch? Like, what did you struggle? What adversity did you overcome? And if you don't have any, like, that's fine. I'm happy for you, but I also don't want to invest in your business, right? Like I needed you to have overcome something to know that you can, and, to reward you for that. Right. And everyone, Stripe, Elon, Tesla, like everyone has had those levels of adversity before they are stupidly successful, generally, is what I find. So same thing with, I put this right in the essay. Like the first sentence of that essay was, I left my job at Pinterest as employee number 2 before vesting my stock. That's the equivalent of my parents dying. Like I gave up hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stock to start a company that failed. Most people would not want that, and so therefore you're already leaning into the rest of the story. You're like, you want to know what happens next, because like it's kind of a rags to riches story in a sense, right? So it's The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, right? Like you have to find like the dark night of the soul. You have, like Batman is a great example, right, of his parents dying and being at fault. Every Marvel movie is basically the same thing too. Like that's a trope that they, Spider-Man, right? His uncle dies. He takes the blame for that, right? So it happens over and over and over again. People reward heroes for that, like that's why we don't mind that they get super famous and wealthy. We would never switch places with them. That's really, really important. I always tell founders that too. I'm like, I'm an investor. Like I'm like the worst kind of founder. Like, so anyway, I do have to run in a sec. I have a call to jump to.
Yeah, of course. Let's wrap up there. Well, thank you so much, Sahil, for sharing all your insights with the Earlywork community. It's been amazing. I do want to give a quick shout out to Alaha, my co-host. She's a member of the community who sort of put her hand up to co-host this. Also, shout out to everyone who attended. And Sahil, last minute plug, where can we find you and where can we see your book on the shelves?
Yes, hopefully in most bookstores at this point, but Amazon is a safe bet. And then at SHL on Twitter is kind of where, kind of the index on me. And then you can, link out to a bunch of different places. My pin tweet or my website has a bunch of links to check out if you want to learn more about anything I've written or spoken about. I've actually uploaded all my essays. I recorded audio versions of them, so they're on Spotify now. Just trying to make my content accessible to everyone in the the format that they prefer.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again for spending the time with us, and we'll see you all later. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Take care, everybody.
Go
Nice
back.
meeting you. Love
Yeah,
you.
bye.
Thanks, everyone.